In 2012, newspapers carried a headline that felt almost cinematic. Parents accused their adopted 10-year-old daughter of being a 22-year-old imposter. The claims were shocking that she wasn't a child at all, but a dangerous adult masquerading as one, that she was violent and tried to harm her adoptive parents. For some, it sounded like a plot straight out of a horror movie. For others, as they put it, it was a tragic misunderstanding, although it was hardly that. I mean, imagine waking up one day, as usual, you go to the kitchen to have breakfast and see your whole family, mom, dad, brother, sister, and everyone you love, all packed and ready to go. You ask them, guys, where are we going? Thinking they've planned an exciting journey. But instead of a pleasant surprise trip, they tell you that you're not who you claim to be, that you are another person completely. And on top of that, imagine being just 10 years old, and your supposed family is leaving for good, stating and insisting that you're not 10 but 22 and can manage on your own. Do you remember yourself when you were 10? What would you do in that case? I know that I would freak out like crazy. However, people react differently to all kinds of news. Natalia Grace, an orphan from Ukraine, had to relive this nightmare. She was adopted into an American family with the promise of love and decent life, only to find herself abandoned, wrongfully accused, and transformed into a symbol of one of the most bewildering adoption scandals of the 21st century. But to understand Natalia's case, we must first understand the condition she was born with: dwarfism. It is not a single disorder, but a term that describes over 200 different medical conditions that result in short stature. The most common type, achondroplasia, accounts for nearly 70% of all cases. Worldwide, some medical sources estimate that 4 to 5 in 100,000 live births are affected by achondroplasia. In the US, estimates of people living with dwarfism range in the tens of thousands, though precise numbers are uncertain, and worldwide prevalence is even harder to pin down. Most live long, healthy lives with normal intelligence, ambitions, and dreams, but they also face extra medical complications: fragile bones, joint pain, spinal issues, and beyond medicine, they face something equally damaging: discrimination, prejudice, and the constant reminder that their size makes them appear younger or older than they are. And this, as we'll see, becomes a central weapon in Natalia's story. Her stature, her body, her medical condition, all twisted into evidence. But evidence of what? Natalia Vadimevna Gava was born on September 4th, 2003 in Mykolaiv, Ukraine, to biological parents Vadim and Anna Gava. Diagnosed early in life with a rare form of dwarfism, she faced the same hardships as many children with disabilities in post-Soviet Ukraine: limited medical care, overcrowded orphanages, and the profound social stigma that often followed visible differences. Eventually, she was placed in institutional care. In 2008, an American couple, Diane and Gary Ciccone, traveled to Ukraine and decided to adopt her. For a short while, it looked like the beginning of a new life, a chance of stability and belonging. The Ciccones brought Natalia to the United States, integrating her into their family. But within 2 years, the adoption broke down. Accounts differ why. Some reports mention difficulties managing her medical and emotional needs. Others describe broader family challenges. What's certain is that the Ciccones relinquished their parental rights, and Natalia re-entered the American foster and adoption system, once again without a permanent home. This was the first abandonment Natalia would endure in the US, but unfortunately, not the last. At this stage, Natalia had been speaking English and adapting well. In 2010, she was adopted by Christine and Michael Burnett of Indiana, a family already known in their community. Christine ran a daycare and Michael worked as an engineer. They had 3 biological sons, including Jacob Burnett, celebrated as a physics prodigy. For a brief time, life seemed stable: a home, siblings, a future. In the years following adoption, the Burnetts began raising doubts about Natalia's age. Christine later alleged in interviews and court documents that she observed menstrual bleeding suggesting puberty, and that Natalia used vocabulary or behaved in ways inconsistent with what she believed a 6-year-old would. They alleged she had advanced hygiene habits and did not show the expected growth over time. Michael and Christine began to suspect that Natalia might not be a child at all, but an adult posing as one. Some media accounts cite that they also alleged she exhibited disturbing behavior, such as making threats toward family members, writing violent notes, and attempting to harm one of their sons. However, none of these claims were ever substantiated in court, and there were no police reports, psychiatric diagnoses, or definitive public records confirming such incidents. Christine brought Natalia to multiple doctors for evaluation. Reports differ, but it appears that a primary care physician and a dentist suggested she looked older than her stated age. Some bone density scans used to estimate age gave various assessments. None of these were forensic grade or court certified. Despite this ambiguity, Christine took those opinions as confirmation of deceit and began pushing for legal recognition that Natalia was an adult. In June 2012, the Burnetts filed a petition with the Marion County Probate Court, Indiana, to legally change Natalia's date of birth from September 4th, 2003 to September 4th, 1989. The petition was granted within 11 days, and the court did not appoint a guardian to represent Natalia in the case. The Burnetts submitted medical and social opinions, but there appears to have been no formal adversarial hearing. Overnight, Natalia was no longer their 6-year-old daughter. Officially speaking, she was now a 22-year-old woman, legally responsible for her own actions. The legal change repositioned Natalia's status from minor to adult in the eyes of the probate court, complicating future claims that the Burnetts had a legal duty to her as a dependent. But court rulings on paper don't erase flesh and blood. She still had the body of a child, the medical needs of a child, and, according to later DNA testing, the age of a child. This decision is one of the most criticized elements of the case: the lack of procedural safeguards for Natalia, who had no legal advocate present. Adopted Natalia should have been a story of compassion, a family with resources welcoming a child with special needs into their home. Instead, it became the spark that ignited one of the most controversial legal and moral battles in recent memory. After the age change, Natalia's situation deteriorated rapidly. The Burnetts moved her into an apartment in Lafayette, Indiana, miles away from their family home in Westfield. They paid rent for a few months, taught her how to use a microwave, shop for groceries, and left her with some money. Soon after, the family moved to Canada, where their son Jacob was beginning studies at the Perimeter Institute for Theoretical Physics. They did not take Natalia with them. Neighbors later reported that Natalia struggled to live independently. She didn't know how to cook, walk long distances, or manage finances. Around 2013, authorities received reports of Natalia living alone. Media accounts say she was malnourished, frightened, and confused. They reopened the investigation into Burnett's for neglect of a dependent, though it took years before formal charges were filed. Neighbors would later describe a girl who looked far younger than her so-called legal age. One neighbor recalled she couldn't even reach the light switches. She looked like a child. There was no way she was an adult. But the Burnetts offered a different story. They claimed Natalia was manipulative, even dangerous, that she plotted against them and once even threatened to stab family members in their sleep, that she smeared blood on mirrors and poured bleach into Christine's coffee. Whether these events happened as described is impossible to fully prove. What matters is this: the Burnetts believed, or wanted the court to believe, that Natalia was a danger. In interviews and later in court filings, Christine Burnett painted Natalia not as a helpless child, but as a calculating adult. She cited medical notes suggesting bone density tests showed Natalia was older than claimed. She pointed to dental development, but other doctors disagreed. Some tests suggested accelerated development, while others placed her closer to the 8-year-old she was supposed to be. The evidence was contradictory. When Natalia finally spoke publicly, years later, her words cut through the fog. She alleged Christine forced her to go along with the lie, rehearsing what to say to doctors and officials. Natalia also alleged Christine's discipline was not discipline at all, but abuse, beatings with belts, being sprayed with household cleaners, screamed at, and threatened. She insisted she never tried to kill anyone, never poisoned coffee, never wielded knives at night. Instead, she said she was a terrified child gaslighted into believing she was someone else. Natalia's version is not only a denial, it is an accusation that the Burnetts orchestrated a campaign to erase her childhood and rid themselves of responsibility. The Burnetts' biological children also weighed in. Jacob, their eldest, later claimed Natalia frightened him. At other times, another son described Natalia's treatment as unfair and said Christine had exaggerated events. These conflicting statements painted the household as a fractured stage play, half the cast reciting one script, the other half reciting another. Natalia, in the middle, was accused of being the villain in a performance she never agreed to stage. What makes this confrontation so disturbing is not simply what was done, but how perception was weaponized. If Natalia raised her voice, it was framed as proof of aggression. If she cried, it was dismissed as manipulation. If she stayed silent, it was read as scheming. This is the impossible trap. Every behavior became evidence against her. In detective novels, this is called the damned if you do, damned if you don't paradox. In real life, it was the scaffolding of Natalia's identity crisis. It would take years, documentaries, and DNA testing before Natalia's voice would finally cut through the noise. But for now, the confrontation was one-sided. Natalia was isolated. The Burnetts controlled the narrative until other families entered the story, families who saw her not as a monster, but as a girl in need. After the Burnetts moved out of Indiana, Natalia's story might have ended in silence, a girl written off as an imposter, but it didn't. Another family stepped in. Antoine and Cynthia Mans, a couple from Lafayette, Indiana, with several children of their own and experience in fostering and special needs care, welcomed Natalia into their home. They took her involuntarily around late 2013, offering her a home, education, and care. At that time, the brunette's age change order still stood, meaning legally Natalia was an adult, not a dependent. But the man's family believed she was a child who had been abandoned and traumatized. For several years, Natalia lived as a member of the man's family. As reported by Mans and the media, she attended church and community events, participated in home education programs, received ongoing medical treatment for her dwarfism, and was treated as one of their children, sharing daily routines and holidays. Cynthia Mans later told media outlets that Natalia just wanted to be loved, and that her emotional maturity was consistent with a young teenager, not an adult. The Mans denied Natalia ever displayed the violent or manipulative behavior the brunettes had described. In 2016, the Mans family petitioned an Indiana court for guardianship. Their documents called Natalia an alleged incapacitated person, language often used for minors or adults with special needs. But the brunette's earlier court victory, the change of her birth year, hung over the case like a curse. Legally, Natalia was already classified as an adult. The Manses argued she was still a child. The law, however, refused to turn back since the court had accepted paperwork that contradicted medical records, orphanage files, and even Natalia's own testimony. Once a piece of paper made her an adult, reversing it became nearly impossible. Their guardianship petition was denied. For several years, Natalia lived with the Mans family. At first, it seems she had finally found stability, but by around 2020-2021, tension reportedly developed in the Mans household. Natalia described the relationship as restrictive and suffocating, claiming they limited her contact with the outside world and monitored her closely. The Mans, in turn, said they were trying to protect her from media exploitation and public harassment. She eventually moved out of their home around 2022, seeking independence. There were no allegations of abuse or criminal charges against the Mans, just personal and emotional strain after years of public scrutiny. Then came the test that changed everything. In 2023, while filming the Max documentary The Curious Case of Natalia Grace, Natalia Speaks, a DNA test was initiated in the context of the documentary's production, however, not as a court-ordered scientific exam. It was an advanced DNA and epigenetic analysis that estimated Natalia's biological age to be around 22 years old, a result which, in her view, corroborated her original Ukrainian birth records and contradicted the 1989 re-aging order. The test was conducted by a private health lab, reportedly at the request of Natalia and the producers of the documentary, with the Mans family cooperating in the process. While the DNA test has been widely publicized as confirming her age, scientists and journals caution that epigenetic age estimates are just that, estimates, not absolute proof. In my opinion, even accounting for a margin of error, it's implausible, I'd even say highly implausible, that the estimate could be off by more than a whole decade. From what I found, the average error would be around 3-5 years, though in rare forensic applications, deviations of 7-10 years have been discussed. However, those are extremely rare. Some critics also question the certification of true diagnostics procedures in this context. Nevertheless, it was the scientific confirmation Natalia had long waited for. Proof that she was a child when the brunettes claimed she was an adult. Proof that she had been abandoned not as a woman in her 20s, but as a girl of barely 10. In 2019, long before the DNA test, prosecutors in Indiana had brought charges against Michael and Christine Burnett with multiple counts of neglect of a dependent. The accusations were straightforward. If Natalia was a child, then leaving her in an apartment alone constituted criminal abandonment. But the courtroom is not a place for moral clarity. It is a place for the rules of evidence. And here, those rules worked against Natalia. Prosecutors faced significant obstacles. The age change ruling constrained which documents and records they could use to argue she had been a minor. They could not rely on hospital records that contradicted the court order. The very documents that could have proved her age were legally inadmissible. In October 2022, a jury found Michael Burnett not guilty. By March 2023, the charges against Christine were also dismissed. Neither served prison time. So basically, they were acquitted not because Natalia was proven to be an adult, but because the 2012 court order protected them legally. To many, this felt like a miscarriage of justice. To others, it was proof that the Burnett suspicions had at least some legal merit. The case is closed, but the debate is not. Was Natalia the victim of abandonment or the perpetrator of deception? The trial left both possibilities open, provoking endless speculation. In the years that followed, Natalia's life became the subject of documentaries, podcasts, and even dramatizations. HBO Max released The Curious Case of Natalia Grace, followed by Natalia Speaks. A dramatized series titled Good American Family turned her story into scripted television. The media exposure gave Natalia a voice. She spoke directly, explaining her side of the story. But it also turned her into a spectacle, a living question mark debated in living rooms and online forums. By 2023, Natalia's legal battles were mostly over. The Burnetts had walked free. The man's relationship were tense. But then came a new twist. A family from her past re-entered her life. In early 2024, after a long time of shifting guardianships, courtroom battles, and broken promises, Natalia Grace found something she had never truly had: stability. She was welcomed by Nicole and Vince DePaul, a family from upstate New York. For Natalia, this was not a chance encounter. The DePauls had once tried to adopt her in 2009, before the Chicconis and the Burnetts. Their application had been denied then. 15 years later, fate circled back. With the DePauls, Natalia speaks of reliability and security. No sudden moves, no courtroom battles. She has family now, a support system, people that describe her not as a headline, but as a daughter. For the first time in over a decade, Natalia Grace no longer lives under the shadow of guardianship, disputes, or criminal trials. She lives in a home where she's happy. Natalia is working toward her GED, General Equivalency Diploma. She has spoken about dreams of becoming a teacher, of helping children who feel forgotten or misjudged. She is learning to drive. She is building everyday skills most of us take for granted. Opening a bank account, cooking meals, shaping a future step by step. After years of being told who she was, an imposter, a danger, a victim, Natalia is writing her own definition of herself. Yet questions linger, unsolved. Why was the Burnett's age change petition accepted so quickly, despite contradictory evidence? Should the 2023 DNA test trigger a legal reversal of her age on paper? Why did prosecutors fail to secure convictions when later science aligned with Natalia's original birth records? And beyond the legal, there is the human. How do we measure the cost of a stolen childhood? How do we calculate the years spent in doubt, isolation, and mistrust? In Natalia's own words, she said she was manipulated, she was silenced, that she wants people to understand she was never the villain. She has also spoken about forgiveness, not excusing what was done to her, but refusing to let hatred define her. For someone whose life has been dissected in courtrooms and media studios, the most radical act may be simple: choosing peace. Natalia Grace's story is more than a scandal. It is a parable about identity, justice, and the fragility of truth. A piece of paper said she was 22. Science said she was 10. A courtroom said her parents were innocent. The world said she was a mystery. But beneath it all is a young woman who only wanted what every child deserves: safety, family, love. If this story struck you, don't let it vanish as just another headline. Support organizations that protect children with disabilities, like the ARC of the National Center for Learning Disabilities, or any other group that advocates for kids with developmental and intellectual disabilities. Learn about adoption laws. Speak up when you see someone vulnerable being silenced. And most importantly, remember, behind every sensational headline is a human being. Natalia Grace is not a case file. She is a person, and her story is still being written. Stay aware, stay human. See you in the next story.